Hello, this is Ian Pouncey with Henny Swan once again, and welcome to our next talk in ID24 November 2017. As usual, we'd like to thank our supporters, who are Barclays and the Centre for Inclusive Design. You can find out more about those organizations on our website, but we really could not do this without them. If you like this session or any of the ID24 sessions, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. We aim to do a lot more on this channel, and that's the best way to find out more. So, Henny?
Morning, everybody. Thanks, Ian. So also a quick reminder that if you have questions for the speakers or comments, please do tweet us using the ID24 hashtag. And we'll be picking out the best question or comment per session and giving out a free 90-day JAWS license as well. So keep your comments and questions coming.
I'd also like to say hello to our friends at the Centre for Inclusive Design in Australia, who have been streaming this all day so far. So I hope you're doing well over there and finding it as interesting as we are. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Hidde de Vries, who's going to talk on the topic of trolleys, veils, and prisoners, a subject that I know a lot of people are looking forward to hearing about. Over to you, Hidde.
All right, thanks very much, Ian, and thanks everybody for joining at this early hour. And hello if you're watching this later as well, because I imagine if you're in my time zone, you're probably still asleep. So yeah, this talk is about accessibility and philosophical ethics. So I'm going to try and combine these two in this talk. You cannot see me, but I've put a photo in this slide. So this is me. My name is Hidde. On this photo, I'm holding a bubble tea at the Taiwanese train station. It's not that I particularly like bubble tea, but it's very warm there, and this drink was nice and cold. So yeah, this is my website. I've got a blog where I write about web standards, accessibility, that sort of thing. It's also my company website. I'm a freelance web developer, and I'm currently contracting for Mozilla and the Dutch government. So some of this talk is from the perspective of someone who writes code for clients. So I work for small and for big clients, lots of different stuff. So yeah, a lot of the examples will be from someone who just has as a job to write code for clients. This talk isn't about my resume, I promise, but yeah, I thought it'd be appropriate to mention that I've actually got a degree in philosophy. So I studied my bachelor's in Utrecht in the Netherlands, and then I did my master's at the University of Bristol in the UK. So it's not something I mention normally, but this isn't a degree that I have much use for in my daily work. But yeah, there are some things, right? Both philosophy and web development are hugely about abstractions. So that's kind of where I find it's helped me a lot. This is the School of Athens. It's a Renaissance painting of Raphael. And this picture has a lot of ancient Greek philosophers in it. And we'll be looking at some Greek philosophers, or one of them anyway, later. But when I signed up for this, I kind of erased all the memories of my studies in philosophy and in ethics. Researching this talk, I realized it's quite a lot to go through. It's maybe way too much for a 40-minute talk, because the history of ethics is huge, and there are a lot of dots to connect in moral philosophy. Been so many different people with different views that have been commenting on each other and scrutinizing each other's work. The plan is that I will only loosely connect dots, and I'll kind of freely apply these examples and try and keep them super practical to stuff that we can actually use in our daily work. So yeah, some of the stuff is based on the things that I learned working as a front-end dev. Why do I do this, you might wonder? Well, I think many of us have encountered situations where we've wanted to improve accessibility, but we had to convince other people with good arguments. It's not often the case that you can work somewhere and they'll go, oh, please make this accessible. In many cases, that isn't what the client wants or what the kind of project team is looking for. But you can do it anyway, and you can convince people and then try and make it happen. And then it's good to know why and have good arguments. So a large part of why people make websites accessible is that it is the right thing to do. I think that's why many of us are watching this conference as well. Kind of feel like, yeah, this is probably the right thing to be doing this. And philosophers have had theories about the right thing to do. for thousands of years. So I thought it would be a very good idea to look into some of those ideas and try and apply them to the 2017 world of web accessibility. If I can. Yeah, so some arguments for accessibility out there. First, there's some technical arguments, right? And these are the arguments that appeal to me quite a lot as a dev. It's things like the very first website out there. It was already super accessible. It was mostly structured text, which worked responsively. You could zoom in if you like to, and there was plenty of contrast. It was digestible for screen readers. I don't know if we had them at the time, but I mean, I'm kind of cheating here because the real first browser didn't really look like this. But yeah, the very first website was already responsive. And wasn't it one of its inventors, Sir Berners-Lee, who made this text appear at the London 2012 opening ceremony? This is for everyone, and this is something that you can find everywhere. If you look through web standards, descriptions of the web platform, it will always mention that this is a thing that is there to make information accessible to everyone. So yeah, it's built into the platform, and that's why technically, yeah, it makes lots of sense to be focusing on accessibility. Another technical argument is that accessibility is mostly about semantics, and it's focusing on like putting meaning into your code. And if you focus on accessibility, that leaves you with a cleaner code base. Because if you've written code that semantically makes sense, it's full of meaning, then it will probably likely be easy to read as well. So yeah, technical arguments, they make a lot of sense, but they make sense to people like myself and maybe not to the managers that you need to convince. There's also legal arguments, right? The law says that we should do it. This is the case in Europe and America. I don't know about other countries so much. But yeah, your organization can be sued if your website isn't accessible. I'm not a legal expert, but yeah, there are legal arguments. And there are business arguments as well. We can make more money if we include more people. Netflix, for example, they've included audio descriptions. Likely more people with visual impairments will sign up to their service. Subtitles, they likely bring them more users as well. Users with maybe auditory impairments, but maybe also people who like to watch stuff in languages that they're not fluent in. This is how I learned most of my English, by watching like English language TV series with subtitles. Makes a lot of sense. And these are companies that make profit from being accessible, or they can do. And again, I'm not a business expert either, so I don't really know. I've not seen the equations, but I can imagine if you get more users, that can make you money in some way. But yeah, we'll look at moral arguments today. And yeah, those are arguments from ethics. So ethics can be defined in a lot of different ways. And looking back at the history of ethics, which I've done in the past couple of weeks, you'll find that no one really has a super clear definition of ethics. But I'd say it's a field that looks at a few things, looks at how to live, what to do, and how we want our world to be shaped. Ethics isn't part of most computer science degrees or design programs. But our work clearly shapes the world. There's no denying in that. So the question of how to do that seems super relevant. I might be biased, but yeah, this seems very relevant to us. What to think of a website like Facebook? This website encourages certain behaviors. If it's your friend's birthday, it will prompt you to send them a message. Yeah, many others have already written on this person's wall. It's the right thing to do. You have to write on this person's wall now. Or in election time, they will urge you to vote. Their algorithms influence what you're reading as well. And then there's the company's alleged influence on various elections as well. Lots of moral dimensions to this website. So people have been building this website, people like ourselves, they've been working on this website, and they are working on something that you can ask ethical questions about, like about everything, really. Netflix, it influences what we culturally do. So in terms of culture, what kind of stuff we watch. Its algorithms provide suggestions based on what we watched before. And that might include things in the same bubble. Maybe we watch that super liberal comedian and it will show us more liberal stuff because that's probably what we'll like. Airbnb is a website that changes what we do as well. In many big cities, people now buy houses with extra floors in so that they can rent them out via Airbnb. This is changing society, right? So there are ethical questions to be asked there. So yeah, these are just random examples, really. I mean, I could have talked about government as well. They make decisions that shape our world. For example, a government that decides you can now only apply for passports online from the website, they make a decision that you can ask ethical questions about, because maybe then you're excluding people who are super old and don't know how to use the web, or they don't want to use the web, or other people, right? So yeah, there are a lot of ethical questions to be asked about the web that we create. The web influences how we live, what we should do, how we want our world shaped. So yeah, I thought it would be fun to dive into the history of philosophical ethics and look at some thought experiments as well later on. Although I'd argue that this applies to our field, this doesn't directly apply to our field or our daily work. The examples I used them, they don't necessarily, a small caveat there, and they don't necessarily make sense in academic philosophy. I don't have access to academic papers anymore because they're all on the web, but they're behind an enormous paywall. So yeah, my professors might laugh at me for making some of the links that I make, but that's okay. We'll try and keep this nice and practical. But first, some theory, right? Some ethical theories, three of the main ones: virtue ethics, duty ethics, and utilitarianism. The people I'm going to be mentioning are all Western white men. Please note there is fantastic Eastern philosophy. I don't know a lot about it, so I'm not talking about it today. In the following, we'll look at ideas of Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, and Jeremy Bentham for virtue, duty, and utilitarianism, respectively. So yeah, this is Aristotle, or a statue of him, rather. From ancient Greek times, 380 BC, he was born. You could think of Aristotle as the first philosopher, or the first person to write a systematic book about ethics as a distinct subject, distinct from things like sciences or other things that they were really busy with at the time. His moral philosophy had at its goal to help people live a life full of happiness. And then happiness, according to him, is a state that you can reach. And if you reach a state of happiness, people who reach that, they are virtuous, they're good of character, they have friends as well. So there are all kind of aspects to this. Doing the right thing for Aristotle, it's not really about learning a fixed set of rules. It's about learning certain character traits. And that's a really interesting way to look at ethics, I think. So character traits are the virtues that he talked about there, things like honesty, moderation, generosity, friendliness, and courage. So yeah, for him, it was all about learning those traits and trying to be good at them. So those who have mastered the skills of the various virtues, they will live well, they will be happy, according to Aristotle. That's what we're doing this for. So it's not an easy thing. We don't get this by chance. We have to work very hard to become virtuous. And according to him, it's also our responsibility to acquire those skills. And one example of a skill like that is courage. Aristotle saw virtues in kind of an intermediate between two extremes. For example, with courage, so on the left-hand side there's fear, on the right-hand side there's confidence. And if you have too much fear, you'll likely not do anything. You won't get out of the house. You'll be very afraid to be engaging in anything, really. If you have too much confidence, you might be taking way too many risks, and you might be doing dangerous things all the time. So you're gonna have to find somewhere on this line the right mean, according to Aristotle, and it can be kind of slightly to the left, like it is on this slide, or it can kind of be in different places. It's not necessarily like in the middle. If fear is 1 and confidence is 10, it's not like 5 is perfect. The skilled ethical person will kind of be able to navigate this line and know where to be. And he's described like extremes like this for every of the virtues that he's talked about. So it's all about finding the right mean. And again, a scholar, Aristotle scholar, said this: it's not mechanical or a thoughtless procedure. It requires detailed acquaintance with the circumstances. You can't just follow a couple of rules. So if we can take one thing from Aristotle's thinking, it's probably that doing it the right way depends. It depends. It's about dealing with the circumstances, having a certain attitude to problems. So yeah, you need to just think about it and then find the best mean. So if we apply this to accessibility advice can be quite theoretical at times, right? We all know rules like don't skip header levels, super important. It's important to have a solid header structure so that people can navigate your website. But maybe you're implementing a CMS that has a WYSIWYG editor that doesn't allow skipping heading levels. I don't know many CMSs that have an editor that allows you to just define headers and then does the structure for you. I mean, I know one. And in Aristotelian terms, it's about your skill now. So how do you deal with these circumstances? You know you have that CMS. You also know that that rule exists. So now it's about your character that you've developed and your attitude towards this problem. So what you might propose installing a different editor there, or you might spend some time on guidelines for the content people. So these sorts of attitudes that you can have and that can lead to the right behavior. Or maybe the advice is to use semantic markup. But the code base you've ended up in uses a plugin that generates forms, and it generates terrible markup that isn't accessible. That's bad. But the question is, how do you deal with it? If you've trained your virtues, like Aristotle recommends people to do, right? You're probably going to work towards a solution. Again, you're going to find the mean somewhere on that line between no accessibility and some accessibility. So maybe you'll hack into the plugin. You research an alternative, or maybe use JavaScript to tweak things. And something I feel that really applies to this is something Vasilis tweets every month, a monthly reminder that your visitors are not statistics, but actual people. And then he links to the excellent Alphabet of Accessibility Issues by Ann Gibson. There's so many different cases of people who experience accessibility issues, and there's a lesson there. In the real world, there are a lot of different circumstances, lots of reasons that people need your product to be more accessible. And again, it's not about using some kind of rule. You can look at WCAG too, but just following the rules is not going to help. You need to look at the actual people and circumstances. So yeah, finding the mean is in accessibility. It's a skill too. It's something like a character trait that you can kind of try and develop, I think. So yeah, it's kind of stretching what Aristotle meant with his virtue theory, but I think the idea of something that isn't a set of rules, but kind of skillfully applying our ideas of what's right, I think that can be quite helpful for the work that we do. So the second person, and we now make a huge jump into history. We get to the Enlightenment times. So Kant is one of the. This is Immanuel Kant, and he is one of the best-known philosophers from that time, or of all times, really. He was extremely influential in many fields of philosophy, and ethics is certainly one of them. According to what he thought was that people are rational beings. His idea was we all think. We've all been born with brains that we can employ to, think about stuff. We have responsibilities, and for him, that's not something. Yeah, it's good that I can think about it, but I'll just ignore it. No, you have this responsibility. You're born as a human being, and you have to use your capability to think and think things through. So for him, deciding whether something is the right thing to do is really focused on the reasons why we do things. So about how we've thought it through. Kant thought we have something called moral duties. And the one he's most famous for is something he's called the categorical imperative. Let's break this down because, yeah, it's a difficult phrase, I think. Categorical in this sense means something like universal. It applies to all of us. And then imperative means something like an obligation. Now, this is how he's formulated it, or one of the ways he described it in his book. I'll read it out. Act only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. So for many philosophy students, this is the first time and the last time that they see that word maxim being used. It can be seen like a rule, something that applies to all of us. And if you want to translate this to kind of human speak, only do stuff according to rules that you want to apply to everyone. It's about sticking to principles, really. So if your principle is don't lie, then you should never lie, including when a lie might be beneficial to yourself or to your friends, because then it can't be a universal law. So this is the process. First off, you make a rule, and then you ask this question: would you like to turn this into like a legislation that applies to all of humanity? That's the second question. So if your rule is I'm going to lie whenever it benefits me personally, then the second question wouldn't really work, because it wouldn't make sense to implement a universal law that applies to all of humanity that's just about you and your benefits. because then we need to make lots and lots of rules, right? If all the billions of people on this earth would want to make that rule, then we have a lot of laws, right? So that wouldn't work. But if you make it into something like don't steal, and that would work. You could turn that into legislation that applies to all of us. And in most countries in the world, that is actually a law. So for Kant, the difference between morality and prudence is super important as well. So in Kantian ethics, acting out of self-interest can't be moral. You should always act out of principles. So if you're a baker and you don't add poison into your bread because you don't want to lose clients, that's a prudential motivation. It has nothing to do with morality. It has no meaning on the scale of morality. A moral reason would be more something like don't poison your clients, because that's not the right thing to do, right? You don't poison clients. So applied to accessibility, for Kant, I think we would improve the accessibility of our sites because we think that's how it should be. This is how the web was intended. This is for everyone. If you'd only do it because it makes your company more profit, Kant wouldn't classify that as moral. So yeah, I think this is a stance that a lot of accessibility experts take, right? We all think, well, it's just the right thing to do. Interesting to note that that's probably not what our clients think, or maybe our managers. But if we know that and we use that knowledge, then maybe we can use that to our benefit. So the third philosopher, the last one, is Jerry Bentham. He's a utilitarian, and most ethicists today, they will think of themselves as either Kantian or utilitarian. So they either think, we're all rational beings and it's about our actions and motivations, like Kant, or they're utilitarian. And what these people do is they look at the outcomes. So they don't look at the actions themselves. They look at the contribution of our actions. And Jeremy Bentham had something quite cool, which is called the greatest happiness principle. And the idea of it is that you can judge actions, whether they are moral or not, by looking at whether they promote happiness. So if they make happiness bigger, so the total amount of happiness in the world, they are good actions. And if they promote the reverse of happiness, then they are not good actions. So the question to ask is, does my action increase the world's total happiness? So you can look at a basket full of happiness, and if it increases the world's total happiness, it can fit into that basket. So yeah, weird metaphor, I suppose. But yeah, it's all about increasing the total amount of happiness in the world. And then, yeah, you could ask what's an increase in happiness. Many utilitarians kind of disagree about that. Is it your own happiness? Is it maybe your organization's happiness, or the happiness within your group of friends? Or is it like a worldwide kind of happiness? For us, it's probably user happiness, right? And this is how we can apply it. You should make changes that increase happiness and avoid those that don't. It's as simple as that. So an example from the real world, the other day, Twitter made a change. So they used to have this thing where you could see how many characters you had left, and they've replaced it the other day with a donut chart. It's this little circle with a line, blue line that's filling up the circle, so you can see sort of how many characters you've used, but no number. Well, it annoyed a lot of people. Did it increase total happiness? Well, let's have a look. Let's see how people responded. And I apologize in advance to people who might have worked on this. I mean, it's probably a lot of work to build, but yeah, people have looked at it. And Alan Cooper, for example, he said it was abysmally stupid and bad design, a triumph of style over substance. Not too happy then. Someone else seemed quite confused. Someone going by the name of Harvest Pixie Dream Witch said, what the heck is this gradually filling circle of character doom? To which numerous people responded that they didn't like it. And I guess people don't like change in general. But yeah, people really did not like this change. So maybe it didn't increase the total amount of happiness then. Some were quick to respond though, and solve the issue by making a Chrome extension to make the donut go away so that they could have their character count back. So yeah, that's the web. That works on the web. You can just fix the problems anyway. So yeah, the question to ask, according to utilitarianism, is does my action increase the total happiness in the world? And something that we could ask is, does my action increase the website's total accessibility? And you can look at this in a super broad sense, and you can also apply it to other areas, right? It's not only about accessibility. You can worry about performance, usability, those sorts of things. But it's quite a good stance, I think, if you look at all your different actions and then just kind of trying to figure out if they benefit the total amount of accessibility or performance or other areas. So thinking about it like this, we can also avoid the pitfall of thinking about accessibility as an all or nothing equation. Lena Watson says this in the conference talks. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be a little bit better than yesterday. I think of this as like small improvements are helpful. They can increase the total amount of accessibility in this world. So yeah, they can help. You don't need to do whole of WCAG 2 be like 100% compliant. It's probably not possible anyway. So yeah, it's something to think about. You can do little small actions, and they are also helpful. So yeah, that's a couple of examples of attitudes that philosophers have had towards ethics, towards how to live, and towards deciding how to live. Aristotle thought of it as developing certain character traits and kind of gaining skills, as it were. Kant then thought of it as something necessary, a universal thing. And for him, motive and why we do our actions matters. And then Bentham thought of morality in terms of their consequences. So how do they contribute to the world's total happiness? Yeah, and I think it's probably accessibility experts, like I said before, they are kind of Kantian often, because for us it feels like, well, yeah, we just all need to do this, and we need to be 100% WCAG 2 compliant. But I think for our clients, it's usually something in terms of consequences. So what does it cost on our budget, and can we get away with not doing it? And what kind of, they'll look at the financial picture of things. So yeah, this is a difference you can spot. So having looked at some philosophical background, let's now look at some thought experiments. And the first I wanted to mention is the trolley problem. This is the example. So you're looking at a trolley or a tram, and as it's moving along the track, you notice that there are 5 people on the track, which the trolley would kill if it moved ahead. You have the chance to divert the trolley by pulling a lever. The diverted track then has 1 person on it. So if you move ahead, that 1 person would get killed. The moral question here to ask is, do you divert the trolley? Do you make it drive over that 1 person? You have this lever in your hand, and you can go ahead and do that. If you do, then you save 5 people, but in turn, you actively kill 1 person. It's almost like a spreadsheet-based philosophy. The idea here is that killing 1 person is better than 5. There's a video of the American rock star philosopher Michael Sandel, who asked his students the same question: what would you do? And people put hands up here. This is an audience at Harvard. The majority of people out there, they put their hand up and voted for choosing to kill the 1 person rather than let the trolley just go ahead. Only a handful of people said they would do that. They would kill the 5 people. And it seems that helping as many people as possible, it kind of fits our moral intuitions about these things. And there's lots of variations on this. This is one where there's only 1 track. A trolley approaches 5 people who are tied to the track. You are standing on the bridge over the railway, and you can see what's going to happen. A trolley is going to drive over those 5 people, and they will likely die. However, you're on the bridge, but there's also another dude there, and you're able to push him in front of the trolley. That would cause the tram to stop, and it would save those 5 lives. What would you do? That's a tricky one. What if the person you're pushing was actually a doctor and was super close to finding a cure for cancer, or a recruiter? Think about it. There's different moral intuitions about this, and then there's the libertarian variation. So there's 2 tracks. Again, you can pull a lever, but if you divert the trolley, it would now drive onto a road that is in fact private property, and it has a sign of no trespassing. So yeah, libertarian issue. What would you do? Kill 5 people or drive over private property? It's all about making the right choices. Yeah, this is something we can apply in our daily lives. For example, one of your team members might really like subtle. They like to go to restaurants with subtle names and then wear subtle clothes. Maybe they have subtle art on their walls. And when they design an interface, they also like to use subtle shades of gray on a black background. It looks beautiful. This is an example of a footer at bowersandwilkins.com, an audio manufacturer. But there might be another person who cannot really use subtle interfaces because they are working on a train. Their computer is on battery power, the sun is shining on their screen, and the brightness is set to low to save energy. They really require that bit of contrast. So yeah, it's a choice you have to make. Are you going to go for lots of shades of gray or for lots of contrast? And the good news is you don't need to kill anyone here. You can just choose between these things and kind of go for the most inclusive option. But yeah, you have to choose because you're likely only going to build one interface. I would probably go for contrast. In this screenshot, you can see a link that has focus. Many people don't like the way this looks. It's a bluish shade that's around the word, some shadow. I don't really mind it, and I use it a lot, so I'm probably biased. But yeah, if you don't like this, you can still choose between two different options. You can set the focus styles to outline none in CSS, and that removes the outline altogether. Then it's gone, and you don't need to look at it anymore. But that makes the site unusable to some of your users who rely on a keyboard or on other input methods to navigate your site, so they can't see where they are. So the other option is to design a prettier focus indicator, and that's a choice you can make as a product team. So as a digital team, you have a lever to pull. This is a lever you can pull. You can choose to make inclusive decisions. Consider how you can make your product usable for as many people as possible. That's something you can do as a team. And yeah, thinking about these differences. The second example I've got is John Rawls's Veil of Ignorance. This is John Rawls at this university. So imagine a group of people. They're asked to come up with the fairest way to organize society. They can distribute wealth and justice in any way they would like. However, they're covered under a veil. So they cannot see in what position they would be. So they're kind of taken, imaginary, they're taken out of the world, stripped all of their things that they had, and then they will be put back in the world as soon as they decided about the rules. So they are going to make the laws that apply to everyone, and then they are sent back to the world. But they don't know how they're going to be sent back. If they're going to be the CEO of a multinational, if they're going to be a care worker or a doctor, if they're going to be the king, they just don't know. So they're kind of stripped of their social status, their fortune in the distribution of natural assets, abilities, intelligence, strength, those sorts of things. So this experiment kind of assumes that we are all rational human beings and that we act in our own interest as well. So the idea of this experiment is that if you don't know your specific situation in society, which you called the original position, then you would make all accommodations to have an equal world. So you can't take your privilege or lack thereof into account. As you don't know about it just yet, it's going to be fair, even if you decide from self-interest. So if you come up with a system that favors one sex, that would be against your interest if you end up being a member of the least favored sex, for example. So according to Rawls, if people are put into this situation, they're put under the veil, they are taking the original position, as he calls it, two principles will likely influence their decisions. One is the principle of equal liberty. So likely, he says, the liberties will be distributed equally. So everyone gets the same amount of liberties. And then the second principle is, if that isn't the case, so if there is some kind of inequality, then that only works if it causes the least advantaged person to still be better off than without the inequality. So in the Veil of Ignorance situation, you could think of something like our king here in the Netherlands. So he has a lot of palaces and castles and things. He gets a lot of income as well from the state. So there's a lot of inequality going on there to his peoples. However, you could think of this as something that the difference principle applies to, because he travels around different countries and goes on to tell them about how amazing the Netherlands is. He promotes our country, and that's good for maybe our economy. That's the idea of it. So then this would be sort of an inequality that could be just, as long as it causes the least advantaged person to still be better off without the inequality. So yeah, this is probably something that could work for our society, to give that one person a bit more privilege so that he can help us as a whole. So my recommendation would be to consider new features from the original position. So this is how we can reason about how we should do things. So when we think about digital projects, we should think about it from the original position. To put it bluntly, we should leave our privilege at home when we make decisions. So, for example, think beyond your own retina screen. Maybe think beyond where you were born as well, and think beyond your own fast office Wi-Fi. If you suffer from no color blindness, then leave that fact out of any arguments about color choices, because that's not your call then, I suppose. So the last example here that I'm going to talk about is the prisoner's dilemma. And this is not really from philosophical ethics at all. It's from game theory, which has its origins in computer science, mathematics, and economics. So if you've studied in any of these fields, you'll probably be familiar with it. Let's have a look at it. So 2 members of the same gang are taken to prison, and they've been locked separately. They have no way to contact each other. As you can see on the slide, they are in separate cells. So the prosecutors, they don't have much evidence against them, but they have enough kind of to put them away for 1 year each. However, they think, well, if we get some more information, maybe we can put one of them at least away for a bit longer. So they offer them a 1 year reduction if they betray their friend. The friend would then get 3 years in prison, and they would walk out free. So if they both take up on the offer, that's the caveat here, they would both get 2 years. So this is kind of what the matrix looks like. If you betray your friend, that gives you most reward, unless both of you betray, in which case you would both be worse off. So this is all about conflicting interests. And this is something we can use, I think, if we leverage that. We have a lot of interest in our project, right? Here are some conversations that I've had in my work. They might be familiar. So there's a front-end dev and a designer. Front-end dev says, let's keep the focus indicator in place. And the designer says, well, that looks ugly. It's not good for my portfolio. Different interests. Or SEO expert and an accessibility nerd. The SEO expert dictates a header structure and says, please make all the things H1. And then the accessibility nerd says, well, we need a sensible header structure. Or a front-end dev and a CEO. The front-end dev wants to spend some more time on making a carousel more inclusive, and the CEO wants to spend the same budget on our TV ad. So yeah, you can use this, right? Interests and knowing about them can work in our advantage. If you line up interests, they can be a method of achieving web accessibility. It's not my favorite way to argue for accessibility, but with the new Europe-wide accessibility legislations, governments and others, they have to follow WCAG 2. So an argument you can use is that making something accessible costs exponentially more when you do it in retrospective than if you make it in from the start. That is cheaper to do. So this is something that you could convince your CEO with. And maybe then they will not spend money on TV advertising, but they will spend it on a bit more accessibility. So it's all about making the business case. And that might sound boring, but it's not, as proven by Alice Bartlett's fantastic talk about this at Frontiers 2015. Definitely have a look at that. The link is in the slide. It's very good for us people who make websites to learn and speak the language of people who pay for them, especially if we want to argue for accessibility, because we might have these ideals of we want it to be right. But yeah, I think to convince an organization, it can be useful to look at the outcomes and the kind of interest that they have. So let's go back to the prisoner's dilemma. In the real world, you can often see the other person. So that's a big difference. They're not locked somewhere in a different cell. You can actually go out and talk to them, usually. Maybe if they're the CEO, you can't directly access them, but then at least you can figure out about their motives and about their interests. And I found this is a great way to get accessibility done in the places where I've worked. There are always overlapping interests. So yeah, they can be used to promote accessibility, I think. So yeah, these are 3 thought experiments that I've wanted to share with you today. The trolley problem, the wheel of ignorance, or the original position, and the prisoner's dilemma. So in conclusion, and we're stretching these examples all the way from their original meaning for all of them, but these are my 3 takeaways. First, make good choices. Choose the inclusive thing. So divert the trolley into the inclusive direction, and you don't even have to kill anyone. So that's great. Think beyond your own privilege as well. This can be quite hard. The other day I was building a sticky header, and if you know about, if you're also a developer, you know about this. So I've hooked it onto the scroll event, which is super bad for performance. But I have a very fast computer, so I didn't really notice it. This is quite easy to do. We all have very modern machines. in our offices, good Wi-Fi. So it's very easy to not think about people who don't. But yeah, most of your users won't have that stuff. And they'll be accessing your website from all sorts of devices with all sorts of impairments as well. And then the third is line up interests. Figure out what the interests are of the people who are blocking you from making accessible products, if there are any, and try and use that. So yeah, these are my 3 takeaways that I wanted to give you. And then I've got a couple of links. So if you want to know a lot more about the philosophical background of these things and see it in context, I can recommend the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It's a great resource. It has a lot of information also beyond ethics. And it's all peer-reviewed, I believe. So this is a fantastic resource. If you want to read a bit, Justice, What's the Right Thing to Do by Michael Sandler, who I mentioned before. It's quite an accessible introduction in questions around what the right thing is to do. And there's also a video course with the same name. And then lastly, I've got this book called The Essential Writings. It has a number of original texts with introductions so that you can actually make sense of them. That's very, very useful. I've used that a lot in my study times. So yeah, that's it for me. Thanks very much for listening.
Hidde, thank you so much. That was a really, really refreshing and different take on accessibility, and I enjoyed that a lot. And I think just finishing on, thank you, but I think finishing on the sort of think beyond your own privilege and location, that resonated a lot with me, because it's, you know, we we tend to produce content, design and develop content within our own context. So thank you for that reminder. We've had a couple of questions from Vasilis on Twitter. I'll read out both of them, and then you can sort of take them how you will. So the first one is, I guess you're going to answer this later on, but are there philosophers who explicitly say you should not care about accessibility? Followed by, doesn't the utilitarian view also support the idea that it's good enough when the majority of people are happy, and in that way say that it's okay to not design your things accessibly? As long as more people are happy, it's fine.
Yes, I think that is true. The latter point. Yes, you can definitely use utilitarianism to go for that's good enough kind of view. And I think that might not be a problem, because I think it's kind of like the thing I shared, what Lenny Watson said. Small things can also help. You don't need to have it be WCAG Act 2 compliant and for 100%. So yeah, all little bits help. Yeah, it can also help people who want to do like the absolute minimum. And then with the question whether there are philosophers who are against accessibility, yeah, they definitely exist. They do, yeah. I didn't want to include them in this talk because I want to keep this a positive thing and kind of inspire people to do more accessibility rather than less. But yeah, they probably exist.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. Just to speak to Noni's point as well, when I worked at BBC, we had an unofficial rule that if we relaunched a product, it always had to be better than it was before. And then obviously there's frameworks around that. Thank you so much. That was really engaging. For everybody out there, a reminder that ID24 is brought to you by the Paciello Group with kind support from Barclays and the Centre of Inclusive Design in Australia. If you want to know more about those organisations, please visit our website. Do like our YouTube channel. We have lots of plans of what we're going to be doing, and that's the best way to stay in touch. We'll be back at the top of the hour. Keep your comments and tweets coming. We give out a free JAWS license to the best question or comment. And for this session, it's going out to Vasilis. Thank you very much for your questions. We will be back at the top of the hour. Thank you.